This week in baseball, we're going to talk about the All-Star Game rosters being announced. The Yankees are sinking, the Mets are falling deeper than the Yankees, the Rays are rising, and so are the Dodgers. Here we go. It's Sunday. The NBC Peacock had all the MLB games today, and they all played at similar times. It's a weird thing, right? Because if you didn't know, you're like, where's my team?
Yeah, by the way, I didn't know, so I wouldn't have known that. Oh, they're all playing
I don't know
at
if that had to do with the World Cup or what.
day after 4th of July, maybe. Who knows?
I have no idea. But what you got to hear, just for what it's worth, is a bunch of different announcers doing games that you don't normally hear. Because Peacock doesn't have the baseball announcers that we're used to hearing.
As a Met fan, I guess I was a little spoiled because I tuned in and I was immediately like, that sounds like Todd Zeile. And it was Todd Zeile and Adam Ottavino doing the game. But I think certainly having you want to be, funny in your smorgasbord in a sense of baseball games you can pick from in one easy to access place.
Right.
That is pretty nice. It
was free, so you went to Peacock and you could watch anything.
Right, assuming you right. And I think if you would have an even easier time, like you almost could simulate a baseball red zone in a way. You could just move around games watching whatever the big moments in each of the games were in key at bats. And that would be interesting, but I don't know. There's something to be said for watching the game just all the way through.
So, and speaking of watching the game, I mentioned that they came up with the All-Star Game rosters and they named the reserves and I don't know what it is, but because the fans vote in guys and there are guys in there that necessarily shouldn't be in there, and it makes me care less about what's going on. I don't know what it is, but the All-Star Game juice is just less than it is every year before it.
The All-Star Game will never feel like it used to because the players don't take it.
The game itself.
Right. You're never, because the game itself is no longer a highly competitive game in the way it used to be.
Right. In that sense, that's true.
The players
still want to win. They're still competing.
But it's not. Winning doesn't mean as much.
Right, it's not our league is better than your league.
Right. The players are not going out there putting themselves on the line to try and win that baseball game.
But getting named to the All-Star team and
totally matters.
Maybe we'll do something about that when the All-Star game comes up, so we'll have something to talk about at that time. But I think we talked about it this morning a little bit. So Vlad Guerrero Jr. was voted the starting first baseman in the American League, and what he did, which I'm really impressed by this, is he said, "Yeah, nah, I'm not having a good season, basically, and I'm not going to go to the All-Star game."
He said, "Thanks for the fans for voting me, but I'm going to sit this one out." And now Nick Kurtz,
he still gets credit for being an All-Star game starter in his career, so he doesn't have to play in the game to have that happen. So at least he doesn't, it's like it never happened.
Right. He still gets the right. It's a kind of a weird thing because he's not going to the All-Star game, but when
he's an All-Star.
Yeah, he's an All-Star this year. So at the end of his career, he'll have an All-Star nod for this season, which I'm sure he would probably prefer not to have because it doesn't look great. He's having a terrible year this year for him. So it is interesting seeing how, an element of the fact that the fans do factor so heavily into the voting does make it kind of feel silly when guys that are not having objectively good years statistically can make it the All-Star team.
You can't make the game count for anything. You want to give the fans something to do to participate in this process, and so that's a good reason not to have the game count for anything.
Right.
Because if you were actually trying to win, you'd have the players pick who should be the players representing their league, but there's no stakes.
Right, there's no stakes, and I don't think we would want stakes in that way.
I remember they tried that, right? And we
were all like, "This is not."
You get the 7th game of the World Series, and you get the extra home game in the World Series if you win the All-Star game.
As a baseball fan, what you have to do is, instead of looking this as glass half empty, like all of the, wow, our All-Star game is nothing like it used to be. We used to be that. Look at it this way: you still have by far the most competitive All-Star game of all the major sports. Your All-Star game actually resembles.
Doesn't say much for All-Star games.
Right, but it does. At least the Major League Baseball All-Star game resembles a regular game of baseball. It is still 95% of a normal baseball game. And the NBA All-Star game isn't 60% of a normal basketball game.
Perhaps it's the
they don't even try with football
of it, right? Because Major League Baseball's, I think, we're going to be coming up on the 100th anniversary of the All-Star game if they played every single year, like around 1933. So 2033. That's not that long from now. So that will certainly make something happen. I think night when they had that 100th anniversary celebration. I mentioned, the Yankees sinking at this point, and they have played particularly bad and just lost. We're not doing injuries at the moment, but lost Carlos Rodon for 15 days, going to the IL with an elbow problem, which he had before the season. And the Rays, in turn, have done the opposite and have gone on a wild winning streak.
Right. So just after last week, as we were talking about, the Yankees are ready to assert themselves. They go 1-9 over their last 10. Rays are 9-1, and the Rays are right back on top of the AL East.
So, and it looks like those two teams will, be the class of the league. Although run differential wise, the Yankees still far outpace the Rays.
Right. Expected win loss says these teams should basically have reverse records. The Yankees have just found ways to lose games this year, and the Rays are a team that keeps finding ways to win games. And you know what?
They can hit.
Right. They're a good offensive team.
They can hit.
And they're a good pitching team.
And the Yankees, we're hitting in Aaron Judge's absence. And we mentioned he's not due back until August sometime, I guess. But all of a sudden they forgot how to hit. And so now it seems like his loss is much deeper because, okay, well, the other guys have stopped hitting. Where's Aaron Judge? Yeah, he's not coming back for another month and a half.
Right.
He is the center fielder for the All-Star game that won't be playing.
I think it is interesting looking at runs allowed right now, like how many runs you've given up this year. Because I think if you're a team that's given up a lot of runs already, you got to be really concerned because traditionally pitching gets worse as the season goes on. So if your guys are already giving up lots of runs, like the Minnesota Twins have scored 448 runs. They've scored the most runs in the American League. The problem is they've given up 465 runs, which is the second most in the AL.
And it's not like they didn't know that going into the season when they put the pitchers out there. They've got Joe Ryan, in which we think he's going to be traded at the deadline, but maybe not. Aside from that, their pitching is weak, and their bullpen, they traded away their closer to the Phillies last year, Joan Duran, who has ended up doing just fine. But in that Central Division, you have the White Sox hanging on, the Guardians in there with them, and you just think, as you said about the pitching, going, yeah, whose pitching is going to collapse first? In that division, probably the White Sox would be the team.
Right. My assumption is that the wheels would fall off for the White Sox. Probably the best thing for them is that the Tigers and the Royals have sort of fallen apart this year, and
sort of,
and you would guess, and the Twins are 44 and 47, and I don't think that's going to keep holding up. And so the thing that you might benefit from is just getting to beat up on the rest of those teams and the rest of an otherwise relatively weak American League. That might be able to kind of buoy you when you would have what would normally be a sort of second half fade for a team like this.
And the White Sox have been doing this without Murakami, obviously, who's been on the IL for a while. But I noticed today that Colson Montgomery, who's a second-year player, I think he's got the most home runs in Major League Baseball over the past 155 games, aside for Kyle Schwarber and I think Shohei. So he's got like 45 home runs or something like that.
Right, playing shortstop.
The guy is the quietest stud in the major leagues right now, who's an amazing power hitter.
Right, you'd love him to get his average up a little bit because he's hitting 225 right now, but he's still got 23 homers hitting for out of the shortstop position, which is wild to think about.
Yeah. So he's been he's got 43 homers in 155 games. Yeah, since his call up a year ago in July. So
right. I mean, he's looking like
who's talking about Colson Montgomery? We are.
Right, and he looks like he might do that over a 162 game pace. Not only the first 162 games, but then this season as well. He's got 23 right now. He could very easily hit 40 plus this season.
And as much as the Mariners, kind of have a clear path to that division, the Rangers actually showed up and played decent enough baseball to now have it be the two of them at the top of the AL.
That looks like a division that somebody's going to back into,
or go on a win streak and just put it away.
The American League, when you look at it right now, does not look very good. But if you had
everybody knows that,
right? Everybody knows that. But if you were a betting person, what I would be looking at is which one of these teams is going to go like 60 and 22 in the second half
in the American League.
Somebody will. Some team always does. Doesn't it feel like every year there's some team out there that has some unbelievable second half record? They play amazingly well, considering how bad
this year, though. It's really hard to see that for me.
But I got to think one of these teams is going to go wild over the second half, especially after the All-Star break. And maybe it's not 60 and 22, but they go 50 and 25 or something. It's still really good. 25 games over 500, and all of a sudden the Mariners are now looking like
that would be the team, I guess, if I had to pick. Because did you know how many home runs Cal Raleigh has this year?
Like 3.
He's got 8. Come on.
Yeah.
He hit 60 last year.
Right.
He's got 8 home runs.
We all knew a regression
But
of
that's off
some
the charts
sort was
down. Like that's a
Right.
cliff. That's
And the
that's
problem-
not a chart.
right. And this was something we talked about when we were looking at this team. Is like, okay, last year you were helped out so much as a team by the fact that he did hit 60 for you when he took a step back this year. And like, even if he hit 30, where were you going to make? You lost Eugenio Suarez. Where were you going to make up all of these home runs?
And J-Rod's only got 10 now. You are getting.
He's got 14.
He's got 14 now. You are getting a really good year from Randy Arozarena. I think
he's got 9 homers right
but
now.
not from a power standpoint. But
no,
he's,
I mean, you got 3 guys on their team that have hit 14 homers this year. You've only got 4 guys that have 10 home runs. They've hit not a ton of them as a team.
Yeah, and they've got so they've got the pitching. Bryce Miller has 8 starts this year, but he's been unbelievable. No, so I think his WHIP is 0.66 in his 8 starts. So now that he's back and he started the season injured, I just feel like the Mariners have the best chance to put it together. Raleigh will be at least better than he's been to this point in the second half, even if he's not 30 home runs or something like that in the second half. And the Rangers, I don't know. It just doesn't feel like they're going to be able to sustain anything at this point. But there's a lot of good players on that team. I keep looking at them that way.
Well, you look all around the league. You look at a team like the Boston Red Sox, who have the least home runs in Major League Baseball. They've only hit 76, and if you took out Willson Contreras, who's at 19 of them, it's like they're basically the rest of their team does not hit home runs. Now, part of that is due to injury. Part of that is due to a variety of reasons.
Where is Roman Anthony, by the way? Is he playing?
He's played 30 games this year.
Yeah, he's played. He's
hitting 230 with a home run,
and he is their 21-year-old or 22-year-old.
They gave a gigantic
contract, and I think he'll live up to that. But man, is it taking a long time for that to happen? And they, as you mentioned on a prior podcast, they relied way too much on him, sort of bringing Devers, departure, to a nothing thing for the Red Sox, and that hasn't happened.
Right. Well, that was something I was saying before this, and look at this, Jarren Duran, who was Mr. Forgotten before the season. He's helped you out because he's giving you 12 homers. I mean, he's hitting a tidy 193, but he's got 12 homers.
He's on the trade block, but he was a bit more viable as a trade piece a year ago.
Right, because now teams are looking at him going, do I really want a left fielder that's going to hit sub 200 with 104 strikeouts already?
Yeah. So and
254 on base. But I mean, the Red Sox themselves are in a whole big thing this week with Willson Contreras and
well, he had a couple of things happen. He got thrown out of a game, and for basically what was I was trying to mention with the order of the 2 games that it happened in.
Well, the first was he was ejected on Monday because he struck out in first base umpire Nick Lentz. He tapped his helmet, mimicking the gesture, and the umpire threw him out for disrespect. Then the next day, Cade Cavalli decided to open his mouth, and Willson Contreras rightfully objected to that.
Well, he objected to it. So what happened was he basically told Willson Contreras, "Sit down, boy," and everybody heard this. And Willson Contreras was kind of looking at him incredulously, going, "Are you talking to me?" And then threw his helmet, and that's what Contreras. So of course this is my story of the week. Okay, it made me think. Okay, so he got thrown out in consecutive games. That can't have happened very often in Major League Baseball history because that's the way my mind works. So I go in, I do some research, and I'm going to write about this. So I'll just do a quick one on this. So there's 35 guys since 1897 that have been thrown out twice in the major leagues. But then I noticed a weird thing about this. Okay, from 1897 to 1943, a guy named Billy Yergis got thrown out twice. It didn't happen again for 39 years until 1982, and it's happened another 17 times since. So there's this weird time
where nobody got thrown out twice.
Getting it kind of regularly, every once a year, every year and a half, and all that. So and Enos Cabell was the guy who got it doing, and I remember watching Enos Cabell play, and he got it started again in 1982 by getting thrown out of both games of a doubleheader. So 2 for 1 day, and I gotta believe something like that. And I had to look this up. Like Cabell got thrown out of the first game, and the umpire behind the plate, and he didn't even get to bat in that game. He said something, and now you're out of here.
Right. Like probably from the dugout before the game started.
So and there's no other sport like that I think that I can think of like that would get you remember guys being thrown out twice in a row and all the basketball, no one would care. That
Mhm.
probably has happened. But probably Rasheed
I
Wallace
I
got
am
thrown out 3
sure
games in a row.
I am sure guys have been thrown out multiple
I
games in
don't
a
think
row.
NFL guys don't get thrown out very much, and
No, you have to try a lot harder to get thrown out in the NFL. You have to kind of generally like do something.
so yeah, that was my story of the week. Is how many guys have been thrown out? Now 35 in Major League history, and that is that. How about you? What's your story of the week?
Well, my story of the week was something that I was looking at because we talk about it all the times with our pitches and like what makes a changeup really good. Because now when you see everybody, they're all throwing these split finger changeups to get these crazy drops on them, right? But there was actually somebody that did a really interesting bit of research that was looking at this year the whiff percentage on your changeup based on whether the velocity gap or the drop rate of the percentage. And basically how much you whiff on the pitch has nothing to do with the drop rate. It is just a flat. Like balls that have a lot of drop rate, some guys whiff a lot, some that whiff a lot, they drop a ton. And it doesn't really
So it's the timing of the
it's the speed.
right.
You can see a direct correlation that the more of a velocity gap between your changeup and your fastball, the more of a whiff percentage you're getting. So there is a clear thing when you're looking at this, when you look at what is making a changeup. Now, there's obviously it's kind of interesting that when you get towards the extreme end of it, so you're talking 14 to 16 miles an hour under, there's not actually a lot of guys in this.
No,
range.
you need to have it be closer, right? You don't want it to be that far apart.
There's only 4 or 5 pitchers that are in this range. 4 of them are below average. They are below average on the whiff percentage. They're all under 30%. One guy who is about 14 miles an hour is the single highest whiff percentage in the major leagues, over 65%.
Wow. Who is that?
I don't know, unfortunately. Okay. The research did not give me who that one guy was.
So to clarify, basically, if you throw a fastball at 95, right, your changeup is probably most, effective in the 88 range, 87, in that you're 8, 7,
right, most
8 off of the fastball.
The best pitchers
is a big number.
The best pitchers on average are between 6 and 10.
Okay. There you go. So 14 is like a number that normally would allow the batter the opportunity to adjust because it's such a difference. Believe in that he can do that. No, I'm talking about like Major League Baseball hitters,
right?
Not other humans.
And this did require, and just so that if people are curious, it did require more than 150 changeups thrown.
Okay, so you had enough of
or 150, right? There had to be enough of these throws. It wasn't like just one guy threw like a couple of them, and that's how he got them. He had to throw a number of them.
The other story I saw this week, and I don't know if you read about it, was about the baseballs flying further in June, in particular. Which just closed. We're here in July. So they claimed that the production run had some oil in the baseball yarn that made the baseballs a little yellow, and a bunch of they passed them through, and basically balls were flying somewhere between 6 and 8 feet further in June than they had in other measured months. So this is back to 2019 home run pace is what happened.
So that
June.
little difference in how the ball was made.
Now the baseball thing, as it always does, that production error. We didn't try to do that, and I actually don't believe baseball's good enough. This is my thing. Is like they're trying to juice the baseballs. I don't think they're good enough to be able to just dial it up or down a little bit like that.
Not mid-season.
So.
Not mid-season. I 100% believe that they could, between seasons, look at the ball and make alterations to it, just because they can look at how it's made scientifically and change how they're doing.
It's arguable. You're right.
But I don't think that would be something they could change mid-season production stream. Like, I don't think they're that good, and I think you're right in that respect.
Check out the article in The Athletic, because it is interesting, and it'll be interesting to see if this is sustainable for the rest of the season, because I think baseball is still about home runs, and I've seen plenty of pitchers in June have a ball get hit and look at it and go, that went out. So maybe the 6 to 8 feet is a big difference.
Oh, right. And I think you gotta keyed it in there. Baseball is a game ultimately about scoring runs. That is what you are trying to do. And all of the statistics and all of the analytics that we look at are generally in an effort of trying to answer the question of what is the best way to score the most amount of runs and what is the best way to prevent the most amount of runs. And that's why you've seen baseball evolve from a sport where, oh yeah, a guy that hits 300 but only hits singles would have been once considered a good hitter. Now people would look at him with scorn as saying that's not a good hitter, because a guy that hits 250 but hits 40 home runs is much, much more valuable.
I saw I read an article about Otis Nixon. I don't know if you remember Otis Nixon as a player.
Yes.
Probably okay. Anyway, he was a speed player
Mhm.
and wasn't a hitter. He had a career ops of like I don't know 91 or
Right.
something like this. But the guy stole 500 bases. So it's really hard to see. We evaluate so much guys on their ops, and this guy was never going to have an ops because he'd hit no power. And
Right.
so he couldn't. And he was not a great on base guy, but he could steal bases, and that doesn't help you in ops.
No, it is interesting. Like, I wish there was a way for that. We've talked about
We
this
talk about adding
preview.
a stat, so it penalizes the base stealer who isn't a power hitter, which is traditional. So we have to remember when we think about ops that it isn't everything. It tells you about the slug percentage,
Mhm.
but it would be cool if we had our
Right,
additional
right, right.
stats
But
we
that's why,
built,
yeah, I think
bases created per plate appearance that
right, right.
included steals and caught stealing percentage, so you could basically value the entire
Factor that in a little bit.
entire
Right, you almost want to be
contribution.
like a runs created statistic, because a guy that steals, because it's like people would say with Soto sometimes, and like when you see guys stealing bases, like, okay, yeah, he had 500 steals, but what percentage of those 500 steals were actually meaningful steals?
Right, and I think you would say what percentage of runs are scored on times that they steal
Right.
bases more than they would have scored had he not stolen
Right,
bases.
I would like you'd love to adjust people's careers to be like, okay, what if we removed all garbage runs and stolen bases and home runs and stuff like that? Like, okay, in games where your team was up 16-3 and you were facing a non-standard pitcher, we're just not going to count those
Well,
statistics.
there are stats like that
Right,
you
right.
could pull out.
But like, I feel like if you looked at that, it would be interesting, because then if you took a speed guy and you said, okay, yeah, we'll factor in your stolen bases, but we're taking out all the steals you got when you were up 10-0, the catcher just didn't throw. That does not count. That's not a stolen base for you anymore.
Well, a lot of times they call that catcher's indifference.
Right,
So
but they did not used to always count that
Yeah,
catcher's
I-
indifference.
I-
He
I-
used to get free steals left and right.
I don't think so. Let's we're not going to talk about the Mets too much, but I think what's happened here, because the Mets are so bad, is I'm not watching as much baseball because the Mets aren't worth watching, and we've got the World Cup going on right now, so it's a little easier. There's going to come a point where the World Cup's going to be over, and
Right,
we're gonna
right.
be
August
beyond the
is gonna be
All-Star
really
break,
rough.
and the Mets are just playing out the string. So it's just the nice thing is I've got a lot more time in my hands because I don't have to watch the games anymore. I follow it. I kind of know what's going on, but I'm okay if I'm not watching, if
Right.
I'm not listening. It's okay, and it's too darn early in the baseball season for me to feel that way.
I mean, like, God forbid, usually it's like, as a Jet fan, I'm used to this, because as a Jet fan, you usually hit this point by about like September. It's like, oh, okay, it's week 3. Yeah, this is where I expect to be. The Mets, I usually at least hope they usually keep me on the string until about August before they finally break my heart. This year, they just went for the knees in like May.
So I'm going to work on here. My wife Michelle, our producer, is always talking about coming up with another team to root for. I tell her I can't do that. I can tell you one thing: it won't be the Yankees.
I know who it should be.